We're off to a good start. So as you can probably tell, I'm Valerie and I'm Scottish. I am part of the Lean Agile Glasgow organising team, and I've been doing that for a while. That community taught me so much when I started out on my journey, still does. Every time I go along, I feel passionately that communities are where we learn so much. So I'm so happy to give my time for other community meetups and people that give their time outside of work hours like I do to learn more and continue their professional journeys. So I appreciate all of you, and I appreciate the work that your organisers do as well, because it's not an easy task running a meetup, let me tell you. So thank you, Tom and the team, for that. I am an independent agility and leadership coach up here in Scotland, and yeah, I absolutely love human behaviour. I'm a complete geek about that. I'm a geek about complexity, and I'm a geek about systems. And today I'm going to share with you something that I've been working on for a little while. I have created a leadership model, which you're going to see a little sneak of in a minute. I have named it after myself at the moment. I'm trying to absolutely own it and be proud of what I've created. So at the moment, it's called the McLean Loop of Leadership Agility. It has been a work in progress for a couple of years. It changes often. There is a change that might be coming. I might share that with you over the next couple of weeks. I might change it again, just based on some of the feedback that I've been getting. So I love feedback. So any feedback that you've got on the loop, on the talk, just tell me. I'm like a sponge. I like to just keep learning all of the time. But I'll share with you the loop today. I'm going to tell you a bit of a story today. We're going to maybe do some drawing later as well, if we have time. Okay, what are we going to be learning about? So I'm going to talk a little bit around some of the anti-patterns that we see, and why our brains aren't helping us to turn those anti-patterns into helpful patterns. Because I think that the world that we're living in now is asking us to do lots of things, and it's asking us to do lots of things more quickly, and things are taking longer rather than less time, and the results are less predictable. So I really want to help around this, and I think that agility can really help us with that. So I'm going to share my views on that, and I'm going to share a leadership model that can hopefully help to guide you in the work that you're doing. So I'm going to tell you a story. I need to tell you that it's not a real story. It is based on some real events, some things you will recognize, but it's really based on patterns which I have noticed through my experience and listening to stories of other people. So there are some things that you will recognize in there, but it's not a real story. Okay. I want you to imagine that we all work in the 1920s for a company called Burns, and Burns makes cars, and we're making one of the first mass manufactured car in the world. And we all work in this factory in the USA, but we are from countries all over the world. So we all speak different languages, and we can't actually speak to each other because we don't all speak the same language. But we don't have to speak the same language, because we don't have to talk to each other in order to do the work that makes this company successful. Because everybody in the factory receives an input, does something to that input, and creates the same output and gives it to the next person on the chain, or the next part of the process in the chain. And every time we do the same thing with the same input, and we create the same output. Everything's repeatable, everything's predictable. And every time we do that, we create the same car. So we're always creating cars, and then Burns are able to sell these cars. People are buying the cars, and the company is quite successful. So over the years, over the decades, Burns creates lots of cars of this kind, and lots of cars of other kinds as well. And the way that they work is that the head office does the designs and the specs, and then they give instructions to people who then create the cars. People buy the cars, Burns makes money. I call it command and control, but it worked. It worked for this company for many, many decades. They were market leaders in many markets globally. And we fast forward 80 years-ish. And we've got electric cars that are suddenly needed. Burns have known about this for a while. We know that the fossil fuels are going to run out. And we're about 5 years into the planning and gathering the resources that we need to create our first electric car. And we think it's going to be good to go in about 6 months. We had hoped to have it into the world a couple of years previous to this, but it's okay. It's going to be good to go in 6 months, pretty sure. And then what happens? So a new company joins the automotive market. It's called X. First car that they have ever created, and it's an electric car. And they're making waves in the market. It's been quite successful. And at this point, Burns aren't feeling too worried about it because they know how to make cars. They've got a customer base that's loyal to them. They're a market leader. They know how to do this stuff. But just to make sure they don't mess it up, they tighten their control on their processes that they've got in their development of their new car. So they get it ready, they release it into the market, and I wonder whether it's a success. Oh no, it's a complete flop. They don't make anywhere near the money they need to make for this to even have been a viable experiment. And people don't want to buy the car. And all of those people that always bought their cars before are nowhere to be seen. So the people in head office, the people around the boardroom table are saying, what's going on? We don't understand. We know how to make cars. We are successful at making cars. What's happened? Are our consumers being brainwashed? Are our staff sabotaging us? Have our people lost their touch? What's going on? But none of that is, of course, true, because this company was doing what it knew, what's made it successful, what's comfortable for it over the past decades. This way of working that I call command and control is all that they know, and it's all that they've ever needed to know. So they're just doing what they knew worked. But this time, it's not even close to having worked out for them. So I'm going to pause the story there because this is a pattern. And I don't know if you recognize some of the things that I have talked about, or that feeling when you're unchallenged in your market or in your work. And then what happens when there's a challenge or a threat that comes into that market or work that you're doing. And the behaviors that we take when there's a challenge or a threat are often the opposite of what we actually need to do when this happens. So I want to help us understand why. But firstly, there's a thing that I need to tell you, is that I think that it's simply not that simple anymore. And I think that Gary Hamel sums it up quite nicely in his book, The Future of Management, where he said, right now, your company has 21st century internet-enabled business processes, mid-20th century management processes, all built atop 19th century management principles. And I think that this is true for many of us. We're not necessarily working for companies that were created in the 19th century, but most of us work for organizations that are built atop those 19th century management principles. If we think about the Industrial Revolution and Taylorism and the sorts of behaviors that I've been describing, most of us can recognize that in our organizations that we work in. So I'm going to break it down a little bit more, and I'm going to discuss a couple of things. One is systems and one is leadership and management styles. First, I'm going to talk about systems, but I'm going to pause to find out if there are any questions thus far.
No questions in the chat at the moment, Valerie.
Okay.
If anyone does want to ask a question, though, either put your hand up, no hands up at the moment, or unmute and fire away.
Nope.
No,
Okay,
not yet.
let's move on. Great. So I'm just going to talk about systems first, and then we'll talk a little bit about leadership, and then we'll get back into the story. Now, when I'm in person, I play a little game at this point. And I think, Alex, you would have seen this game because we did this at Agile Cambridge. And the game is there to represent the difference between an ordered system and a complex adaptive system. I also have some graphics that can help us understand this too. So we're going to use the graphics today. So if we imagine back in the 1920s, we had a system that looked something like this. There are 6 dots, for argument's sake, in our system, and they are all linearly related to each other. So that's the inputs to the process, all the processing that's done with those inputs, then the outputs, in this case, the car, and the market and the uptake of the car being bought in the world. So everything happened in the same way, linear, predictable. It was pretty straightforward. We could just keep making cars and keep selling them. The market was there. Everything worked really nicely. If we move forward a couple of decades, the world starts to look a little bit more like this. So this is a system visualization that could include, for our example, competitors, car comfort options, entertainment options, software. There's all sorts of things that are now going on. And all of these bits and pieces mean that consumers now have more choices. So the things are not linked in a linear way anymore. They're actually linked in ways that we don't fully understand. And this can include our supply chains, our consumers, our competitors, etc. But the changes in the world around us, or the more complex things about the world around us, haven't really reached the boardroom yet. And the reason that they're not really realizing that they're in this complex adaptive system is that they're still successful, they're still the market leader, and there's no reason for them really to change. They're comfortable with their view of the world, and from their results and what they're tracking, it's still repeatable and predictable because they're still successful, they're still the market leader. So they don't really have any reason to do anything different. So I'm going to just model to an extent what this might look like if we released a new car into the world. So imagine that blue dot there is Burns, and we're releasing a new car into the world, and that's going to bring this dot all the way over to the other side. And when that car is released into the world, everything changes. It might look a little bit like this. It might not, but it's different. And things are happening here that we don't fully understand. The car is not fitting and integrating into the world like we expected. If it's more successful than we expected, then we congratulate ourselves and we think, well, our systems are wonderful, our processes are wonderful, we're doing great. If it's less successful than we expected, we start to blame. The blame game starts. So what do? We tighten control. We don't say, what's going on here that might mean we need to change our approach. We do more of the thing that's made us successful in the past, so we tighten our control. But with complex adaptive systems, all the points are integrated in ways that we don't fully understand, and anything can change the environment around you. So anything can suddenly change how things are working in the world. And any diagram or system map that you create is right for that moment in time. But the next day or the next week or the next month, the system will be different. And we can go back to us. So we are that blue dot at the bottom. And we're standing still this time. Maybe we're in a place of complacency. Maybe we're trying to release a car, but the internal processes are stopping us, or we've got waterfall development that's stopping us. And somebody else does something in that system that at that moment looked like this. So X releases the car into the world, and the world looks like this now. We are in a completely different place with completely different relationships. to the things around us than we were when we were standing still. So when we then release a car into the world, it's really not looking anything like we were expecting it to. And all of these systems that we're part of, most of the time, when you've got human interaction, you're in a complex adaptive system. When people have choices, you're in a complex adaptive system. There's not much in the world now which isn't a complex adaptive system. And none of these things are intentional. None of the systems that we're part of are designed to be the way that they are. In fact, you can't design them because you can't control them and you can't predict what they're going to do. They are a product of decisions that we've made, actions that we've taken over decades or even over centuries. There's no controlling this, and they never stand still. And this isn't new. It could be argued, and it has been argued with me, that in the 1920s, they were working within a complex adaptive system. I agree, but it is more noticeable now than it was back then, because there are more competitors in the market and there are more things that we're doing. But if we fast forward to today, there's so many more things in our systems than there ever was before. And this can be your teams, this can be your organization, this can be the landscape that you build your software in. There's not much now which is repeatable and predictable anymore. It's not just about multiple points like that. Complexity can exist between 2 points. And on that link, which I'll make sure you have all of the resources, on that link, there's a really great simulation that shows a double pendulum effect, that shows that between 2 points, you can also have complexity and uncertainty, and you can't predict what they're going to do. But whatever the size of your system, nearly 70% of executives agree that their industry will change more in the next 5 years than it did in the previous 50. So there is growing recognition and acknowledgement that this is a thing that we need to start paying attention to. If we think about the automotive industry, you can't predict with accuracy what fuel cars will run on in 10 years' time. So we have an idea. Most of us would say it's going to be electric. But the world is changing so rapidly and technology is changing so rapidly that we don't really know. London has hydrogen buses now. How long is it till we get hydrogen car? How long is it until we can mass produce hydrogen cars and suddenly electricity becomes extinct as a car thing? We don't know. Nobody can tell how long that's going to take. Most of these things are outside of our control. How do we know that AI won't impact us? Nobody could have predicted the limitations of mass production back in the 1920s during the Industrial Revolution when it was so successful. But here we are. Mass production doesn't work anymore all of the time. So what do we do now? How do we behave to deal with that? Do we change everything about the way that we run our organizations and our businesses? Well, no, I think that it's simply not that simple either. I don't think that car manufacturers need to change everything about the way that they build a car, because some things are repeatable and predictable. For example, a physical car is repeatable and predictable, but it's the other elements around that that are no longer repeatable and predictable. And it's those bits that we need to take a new approach on. And we put structures around those things to help us. That's what Scrum is. That's what Kanban is. We're trying to help us make sense of things that are unpredictable and unrepeatable. But the outcomes that come from those things, we can't predict. We can predict that we will do a daily stand-up every day, but we can't predict where that stand-up will take us. Humans are unpredictable. So I'm going to give you a chance now. This is when we're going to do a little bit of work in breakout rooms. And I want you to have a think about where in your context you have predictable outcomes from repeated steps. So where can you repeat the same steps every single time and be able to predict before you start what the outcome's going to be? And the reason that I ask you about that is it's actually harder to identify those things that are repeatable and predictable than it is to identify the things that aren't. So if we can identify the things that are, then we can assume that everything else is not. For example, your deployment process might be repeatable and predictable for you. You follow the same steps, the software is live. Perhaps. For some people, perhaps that's not repeatable and predictable, but I'd like to hope that it is. So unless there's any questions right now, we can pop you into breakout rooms for a bit of time to think about that. Any questions right now?
There's none in the chat, Valerie. I did have one actually, but it's probably not related to the topic. It's just related to something you did say. So where you were drawing your system diagram, and one of the slides you showed one of the points got elongated out. What determines the shape what's influencing the shape of the diagram?
So the shape the shapes that I chose there were based on the game that I would have played in person. So in person, what I asked people to do is I get 6 volunteers, and I ask them to stand equidistant from 2 random other people in the 6. And then they have to play the game and shift about, and they just keep shifting about and shifting about and shifting about until eventually, most of the time, they do settle. And that's to show that even though it's very simple rules, we can't actually predict what's going to happen. So when I created those diagrams, I was trying in my head to go, that one's equidistant to those, and I was trying to move them in ways to make them still equidistant to the ones they were equidistant from before. It was very difficult to create those diagrams, but that's what I did to make them, if that helps.
Fab. Yeah, great. Thanks, Valerie. So what I'll do, I'm going to, hopefully this works all right. I'm going to assign you into breakout rooms. Let's have a look. There'll be 2 or 3 in each room.
Yeah, we'll do a couple of 2 or 3 minutes, 3 minutes maybe, to have a conversation with a couple of people about predictable outcomes from repeated steps, and then we'll get you to share when you come back.
Do you want to post the question in the, I'm not sure if I can post it across all the rooms. I'll try, I've just written it down. So I'll try and post it in all the rooms. Great stuff. Right. Happy conversations, everybody. We'll see you back in, how long, Valerie? Do you want
3 minutes?
3 minutes, yep.
3.
See you in 3 minutes.
3.
Great stuff. I think that's it, Valerie.
Excellent. So we had some great conversations here about Formula One cars, and is it predictable that Max Verstappen's going to win every race, or is it not? Is that repeated steps, or is it not? It was great. Thank you for that to those who were still in this space to chat about that. Anybody in their breakout room want to share anything that came out for them as they had that conversation?
Yeah, I'm happy to share.
Yes. Hi, Ian.
Yeah, hi. I was sharing with the other people. It's ironic that I work at Jaguar Land Rover on what's going to happen. Yeah, and I'm working with the research teams trying to work out what's going to happen after batteries. So it's a good analogy.
Nice.
It's a good analogy.
You can tell me how accurate the rest of it is and give me some tips.
Yeah. So on reflection, because of what they're trying to do is complex, sort of. Then in terms of actually building the technology, they don't know how to do it, right? And therefore a lot of them, I would say, are research scientists, which by definition means they don't know how to do it, and that they're learning because they're doing something for the very first time. But in terms of what is predictable, when you get down to the sort of minutiae of what they do, they understand the laws of physics. All right, and the laws of physics are actually fairly predictable because it's well proven. So right down at the really detailed level, like they know how they know how to build electrical components and they know how they're going to behave. But when you put tons and tons of electrical components together, they don't know how it's going to behave. So it's interesting that at a really microscopic level, it is predictable, but actually when you build it up, the behavior of the system as a whole becomes unpredictable, right? So you can predict any individual element that you can get, but it's when you put them together, you don't know what's going to happen. So it sort of made me reflect on, there's predictability if you go down into the lowest level, like, you know, lines of code are fairly predictable, but it's only when you build it up and trying to anticipate how people will respond to all this, then you're back to complexity. So
yeah, nice reflection, thank you. Any more? No more reflection. Okay.
I'll go because
Oh, we've got one?
I ended up being in a nice little group for my own to start off with, so I was getting a lot of back chat, so I then got posted into another room. But yeah, Alexander and David, I explained a situation in my organisation where a lot of predictability with regards to how requirements gathering is done. So we go through like a quarterly cycle, and everything's on a Kanban board, everything's raised there, and we just go through that cycle, just like robots, just to make sure that everything's in there, so all management know with regards to everything that needs to be shared, and then it goes through a prioritization process. So, and at least that way as well, things are written down. So coming back to the point earlier about miscommunication and how that flows from one team to the next, that's quite crystal clear. So that's a repeatable process that we go through. And Alexandra mentioned about the parts about areas about people's behaviour. We know that when we go into certain forums, we are familiar with certain individuals where you know that their attitudes, their expectations, and you just know within the first few minutes that there might be a clash going on. So how to manage refereeing in certain sessions, you know, some of that can actually be predictable. Yeah.
Okay, so I think the first one was a really good example of repeated steps, but I would say that your outcome, I don't think you would be able to predict the outcome of your prioritization every time before you did repeated steps. So it was a really good example of repeated steps, absolutely. But for me, that's one of the structures that we put around complexity to help us deal with the complexity. And the second one was a really good example of something that might be predictable, but you're not always going to take the same steps to solve that predictable thing that's coming up. So it's the combination of both of those things that makes something repeatable and predictable. So you can do the exact same thing every single time and know exactly what you're going to get at the other side. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Okay, Richard, I think you, and thank you, Bobby. Richard, I think you unmuted as well. Did you want to share something?
I was going to say that think of a lot of things where things are sort of 99% predictable from repeated steps, but there's always a 1% chance that something could go wrong. Say, as an example of, say, getting an expense report approved, 99% of the time that would work as planned. 1% of the time, maybe someone who's involved in the process might be off sick and something could go wrong. And probably combinations of many of those processes would say 0.99 to the power of, say, if you did that 100 times, that'll be sort of fairly unpredictable.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that. So there are lots of things that are repeatable and there are lots of things that might be predictable, but both of them together is much more difficult to kind of find. Okay, I'm going to move on now to talk about leadership. If I can get back into my slides, here we go. So I love this quote from Esther Darby: "Traditional models of leadership got us to where we are. They aren't sufficient to get us to where we want to be." So when we talk about traditional models of leadership, that's the leadership that's come from what I call command and control. Hopefully you're beginning to understand what I mean when I say command and control. And if we think about it, when traditional models of leadership were created, the things we were making were more physical. So there was more predictability and more repeatability about doing all of that. And if you think about when we first created computers and software, when that first became a thing, we were still actually creating something physical. We were creating CD-ROMs or floppy disks or computer boxes themselves that had the software on them. And I don't know about you, but the one that got lost in my house all the time, the CD that we needed every single time that we needed to update a computer, was Windows XP Service Pack 2. And we lost it every single time we needed it. We could never find it. It was like gold dust in our house. And I know people that worked at software houses for years and didn't release anything because they didn't release the CD. So we can understand why software processes are built on waterfall processes, because we were still creating a physical thing at the end of it. But now complexity is more than MS-DOS, it's more than a floppy disk, it's more than a CD-ROM. And it's not just about the software, it's about all of our products. They're not just simple, put the pieces together and ship them anymore. We've got digital elements in almost everything that exists. We've got AI, machine learning, smart things, and more than all of that, we now provide services. So now it's about the end-to-end, and people expect from the moment they get in touch with an organization that they're going to get immediate attention, immediate feedback, immediately what they want. Just like that. So if we don't give people something, they're going to go somewhere else. And all of this, it's not just about our products. It's not just about the repeatable and predictable. All the things around that are part of our system. But the problem is that we've created huge empires based on the stuff that's come before, when this was all a thing. I'm going to take a little bit of time, just tiny, to talk about mindset. I hear a lot of people say, we just all need an agile mindset, or we just all need a growth mindset. And I hear a lot of people blaming others for failing to change or failing to accept change. And I think that's really not okay. We can't blame people for not being able to accept change. We are who we are. It's simply not that simple. We have to stop blaming individuals for their inability to change. It's not their fault. So what is to blame? I don't think it's really anyone's fault. I think we've grown up around certain styles of management that are suited for certainty, repeatability, predictability. And I think it's instinctive that we fall into the habit of using these styles, of giving instructions, telling people what to do and trying to control outcomes and outputs. Those types of management and leadership are perfectly well suited to those repeatable and predictable environments. Nothing wrong with it in those environments. So if you've identified some things that are repeatable and predictable in your world, keep going with that instruction giving thing. Find the best process for doing that thing and refine it and make it as efficient as you can. However, for everything else, we do need something different. We need a new tool, because we're not listening to the system when we try to control it and search for certainty, when there is very little certainty in our world now. I want to know now, we have a hand-raising feature here, don't we? Are you a leader? Do you think that you're a leader? Put up your hand on the hand-raising control if you think you are a leader. 1, 2, 3, 4. I don't know how I know more once you go off to 5. How many have we got?
No, people are finding the feet. There's a little there's a button. I was looking in reactions, but it's not in reactions.
Where is it?
It might be
Hand raise.
under the more. Mine is under the more tab.
Under more. Oh, raise hand. Yeah, there it is.
Yeah.
You can raise hand. I can't see you all, so I don't know how many people have raised their hand. Not everyone. I think. Okay. So I'm going to tell you, I'm going to lower my hand. That was not as easy as it should have been. I'm going to tell you that I think that you are all leaders. And the reason for that, you can lower your hands now if you want to, is because I think that a leader is someone who influences others to take effective action. So anyone in this call, any of your peers, any of your managers, your team members, literally anyone who influences others to take effective action is a leader. And I think that's all of you. And the reason I think that's all of you is because you're here at, what time are we at? 7 o'clock on a Wednesday night. You chose to give this your attention. And that alone means that you are capable of influencing others to take effective action. And I think that people often think that they're not a leader because they're not a people manager or they don't have the answers. But we don't need to have the answers, and we certainly don't need to be people managers in order to be leaders. In fact, we shouldn't have the answers unless something is repeatable and predictable. We don't need to have the answers, because the reality is there are no answers, because it's simply not that simple. So I think that leading needs to mean something else, and that's what I'm going to share with you now. We're going to go back into the story. I'm just going to pause again if there are any questions. No questions? Okay.
None in the chat, by the way.
Lovely. So I'm going to continue the story now. I'm going to talk through the model that I've created. Each area on the model has a set of tools and a set of reflective questions. I'm going to give you a lot of information. I'm also going to give you a link to my website where all of this information is. So I'd like you just to be present, carry this lightly, and if you're interested in it, you can go on there and check it out later on. And also, we're recording this session, aren't we, Tom? So the recording will be available at some point in the future.
Yep. Yeah,
Okay, we're back to
as
Burns.
soon as we can after.
Yep, perfect. We're back to Burns, and I need you now to meet our character called Henry. He's been working at Burns for 15 years. He is the project lead for Electric Car Take 2. Lucky him, eh? I also need you to meet Mel. Mel is Henry's mentor. And Mel is awesome. She just happens to have read all the same books and watched all the same videos and listened to all the same podcasts as I have. Here is a list of those. Again, you'll get access to all of this if you're interested in it. But yes, Mel is super cool. Okay. Henry's talking to Mel, and he shares with Mel that he's been given this project of creating this new electric car, and he is absolutely terrified. When Mel asks him why, he says, well, I don't know where to start, really. I know we need to do something different, but all I know is what I've learned here at Burns over the last 15 years. And in that time, things have been led from the top, decisions have been made on his seniority level, and instructions have been given to those below. And he's been told he's going to have autonomy this time. And he thinks that's scary because he doesn't have the answers. How can he have autonomy? So Mel asks him, what does autonomy mean? What does that feel like? What does that look like? And Henry says, I don't know. I feel really weird and uncomfortable when I think about having autonomy. I don't really like that thought very much. And Mel says, well, if you were to draw what that feels like, what would you draw? And he draws this. He says, it feels a bit like a monster. On the inside, I feel absolutely terrified. I feel like I'm being pulled in all directions and I don't know what to do. And on the outside, I think I'm feeling a bit spiky, but I'm desperately clinging on to anything stable that will keep me safe. And Mel says, ooh, that's your Bruno. Wait, we don't talk about Bruno. Don't know if anyone has young children as has watched Encanto, but sorry if I just got the song in your head. There's a very important reason why we are going to talk about Bruno today. So Bruno is Henry's defense mechanism. Bruno makes Henry feel and want to do things that don't make sense. And that's to protect him from scary things like uncertainty and unpredictability. And that's caused when your brain senses a threat. I've put a link there to Dr. Dan Siegel. He's a psychologist, and he calls this flipping your lid. So he's got a hand model of the brain. If you imagine, if you put your hand in a fist with your thumb underneath, and you imagine that this is your spinal cord, this is your cortex, under here is your amygdala and your limbic system. And when your brain is in a calm state, it's like this, and it's lovely and calm, and your cortex is speaking to your amygdala that makes all of your decisions for you. And everything is lovely and calm. As soon as your brain senses a threat, you flip your lid, and suddenly your cortex can't talk to your amygdala anymore, and you're not able to do the things that you normally would do. And I call that your Bruno. Everybody has this in their brain, and everybody's Bruno looks completely different. But what we need to do is notice it, feel it, sit with it, and accept it, because this is part of every single one of us. Every single one of us has a Bruno, and every single one of us needs to learn to accept that. And we need to treat ours and other Brunos with kindness, because it's not our fault. It's just a thing our brain does to keep us safe. And Mel says, here's my Bruno, but everybody's is completely different. You can see visually, they're completely different. This one is mine, the green one, and the blue one is based on my husband's, Bruno. We need to learn to work with our Brunos, and we need to help ourselves move beyond the things that they try to make us do. And Mel reckons that we can use agility as our superpower to help us to do this and to work together with our Brunos. And Mel thinks that agility in leadership is taking short, fast action, changing plans on what we know now, creating hypotheses about what we might learn next, celebrating anything we find out, good or bad, having empathy and kindness towards others. And she thinks that that's central to everything. She thinks it could be their superpower for working together. And Mel also says to Henry that he could try the McLean Loop of Leadership Agility. It's a tool for individuals, and it's to guide them towards a comfortable, open feeling when they're dealing with uncertainty. And it gives practical and personal tools for better outcomes. But she reminds him that this won't be easy, and we will see Bruno around a lot of the time. So this is the loop that I've created. It has 4 main areas, and I'll talk you through each of those areas. And then we have a couple of bits that help us as we move around in the middle of those loops. I'm going to talk you through each part of the loop, and we're going to follow Henry as he goes through each part of the loop as well. So the first place that Henry's starting, this doesn't need to be everyone's starting point, but this is where Henry is now. Consider, this is about figuring out what you already know and deciding whether you need to continue the loop. So you would need to continue the loop if you realize you have things that are complex and that you have things that are unpredictable and unrepeatable. If you find lots of things that are repeatable and predictable, you probably don't need this loop. You're probably in a place that is more complicated, to use Dave Snowden's terms for these things. So tools that you could use in the consider phase include system visualizations, like I've shown you, looking at quantitative data that's available, using a knowns and unknowns framework or case studies of previous similar challenges. These things could help you understand what is already known. And there's loads more tools on the website that may be useful at this point. Again, a selection of the questions for this stage. Have I seen these problems before? How is the problem being solved now? Is it being solved now? What do I know already? Can I predict what will happen next? And what assumptions am I making? And at each stage we have these questions, and they're to check out how you feel. They're to help you become more aware of how you're feeling and how you're doing. And these questions might trigger your Bruno, but they also might help the calm to return if Bruno is around. So lots of things to help you reflect and to build your self-awareness. So Henry gets started. He goes about finding what they know. He finds out information using the tools, and the questions show him the gaps in the knowledge. But he's getting pressure for answers. He's got people imposing solutions on him, and he's got someone looking over his shoulder all of the time, questioning what he's doing. And this is the same person who told Henry, I keep doing that, told Henry that he would have autonomy for this project. And of course, Bruno's around because what's going on? And Mel says to Henry, well, you're being triggered just now. You're flipping your lid and Bruno's coming to play. But also, you're probably seeing the manifestation of Bruno in your boss as well. The person that's told you this is probably feeling quite uncomfortable, is feeling under threat, and is also having that flipped lid response. So you need to remember to accept that about yourself and accept that about your manager as well, and move forward with kindness for both of you. But she says, are you ready to look at solutions already? Do you think there are things that you can predict and repeat? Because if there are, then you need to find the best and most efficient process for those predictable and repeatable things. If not, you need to move into curiosity. And Henry says, no, I don't think we're ready for solutions yet. So let's keep going. So they move round to curiosity. And this is about learning about the unknowns, and it's about finding the gaps that you maybe identified in the consider phase. And Mel asks Henry what his understanding is of the word curiosity. What does it mean to be curious? And he says he thinks it's about asking questions, but he's a little bit, doesn't really like asking questions because he thinks that people who ask questions are seen as troublemakers, or they're seen as incompetent. They don't know what they're doing. And Mel says, yeah, that's quite common. We are rewarded for asserting our views and providing answers quickly. So asking questions and being curious can be completely countercultural to what we're used to being around. But if we are curious, it can give us freedom from judgment, speculation, and assumptions. And it's judgment, speculation, and assumptions that get in our way most of the time when we forget to check in with those things. And she says, maybe it'll help you feel more comfortable to think about how we ask questions. So according to Kellyanne McKercher in the book Beyond Sticky Notes, great questions are worded so they're open-ended, non-combative, concise, and creative. They're asked with an open heart, mind, and body language, and they're phrased as invitations. For example, I'm curious about, help me understand, or I wonder if. Henry has to remember that it's not just him that has to be comfortable with being curious. He has to help his team to be more comfortable with being curious and help them realize that they're all leaders too. And Mel asks him how he feels about this now, and he says, these questions feel a bit different. They feel a bit more neutral to what I'm used to, and I think I could try, at least, to ask some questions in this way. So some tools to use in the curiosity phase. Our colleagues that do user research are just incredible. They have such amazing tools and amazing ways of getting amazing information from people. So loads of user research tools that can be useful for us to learn from. All the maps, I've called out 3 maps on this slide, but we all know how people love a map. So a stakeholder map, an empathy map, a customer journey map, or service blueprints. These things can all help us to not only figure out what sorts of questions we need to ask, find the gaps, but also make sense of the information that we get back. So some really good tools that we can use there. And questions to ask yourself in the curiosity phase. Who might know something about this that I don't? So what voices aren't being heard at the moment? And have I given those around me a license to be curious too? What sort of culture am I creating here? How can I be open to alternative views? Think about your biases, think about your motivation to make sure that you're freeing yourself of judgment, speculation, and assumptions. So Henry feels like he's on a bit of a roller coaster. His team start off speaking to lots of underrepresented voices, and they approached each of these people with curiosity and anticipation. And the people that they were talking to were absolutely loving it. They weren't used to being asked stuff, but the results were confusing. So Henry and his team thought that they knew what they were going to hear, but they found out that everybody had completely different needs, and they weren't even sure whether electricity was going to be the best thing to use for this car that they were trying to build. And Henry feels like he's losing control. He's under pressure to just do it. He's under pressure to have detailed plans and go, but he knows that he couldn't do that because it wouldn't be right. He knows too much now. He wants to micromanage, he feels confused, and he wants to get off the ride. So what's going on here? We've got a massive, massive Bruno flipping lid moment going on here. Bruno is what's making Henry feel like he's losing control, like he wants to make the detailed plans and wants to micromanage, wants to pick a way forward. It's trying to give him comfort in this very uncomfortable situation that he finds himself in. But Henry now has the awareness to know that these things aren't right. This isn't what he should be doing. It's not rational. So he asks Mel for a bit of help. And she says, okay, I'm going to piece this together for you. Your brain needs to unlearn. You need to notice what's not working anymore, discard it and let it go, and make space for something new. Because if learning is tough, then unlearning is harder. And we get trapped in believing the things that helped us yesterday will also help us today. Because our brains need certainty. But the more we notice what isn't serving us anymore and let it go, the better we get at doing that and noticing things and letting them go. But we need to treat ourselves with awareness, recognition, and acceptance. Those things are absolutely key to making sure we can unlearn well. So once you've made space and you've done some unlearning, you can start to connect all of these people that you've been speaking to together and try some things out in the connect phase. So this is about bringing people together, empowering them, giving them a license to lead, giving them the tools to unlearn too if they need it. It's about agility, quick, short, fast action, simple, safe experimentation. And we need to remember that Bruno's around in this space. We need to acknowledge Bruno, notice him. And Henry needs to remember that he has an obligation to his team as well. Now, connect's my absolute favorite part. So sometimes I wax a bit lyrical in here, but I wondered if there's any, I'm going to just pause and see if there's anything that anyone wants to talk about before I move on.
One question in the chat that I raised,
Yep.
but does anyone want to unmute and ask a question themselves first?
I think the kind of barriers that I've experienced is in many different organizations I've worked in, you always come across one or two subject matter experts. And if that individual is not around, you're kind of, you've got the barrier there, and it's how to get through it if that individual is either on holiday, busy on a different priority, and it's that part of the loop sometimes can come to a halt if a certain individual's not there, and it gets frustrating.
Yeah, I bet. Was there a question? Do you want me to?
Yeah, how do you deal with trying to get the correct people when you've got that connect part, but you cannot always get the correct people together? You know, it's sometimes a challenge.
Yeah, it can be a challenge. What I would be trying to help you with if I was working with you and that was a problem that you had would be the curiosity part. So it's trying to, we talk about multidisciplinary teams, right? And people often think that that means that you need a person who is a BA and a person who is a this and a person who is a that. But actually what we can do is we can just learn from each other. So I would be encouraging that subject matter expert to share as much of their brain and knowledge with lots of other people as possible. That is often a flipping lid situation for that person, because a lot of people who are subject matter experts have done the same job for a long time, have a lot of experience, and they feel under threat because they think that people are coming in and going to take their jobs and they're not going to be useful anymore, because that's the only thing that they're useful for. So when you're speaking to people like that and trying to encourage them to share their knowledge, it's about that acceptance of what's going on for them in their head, so that you can work with them to help them feel more comfortable about giving that knowledge out. But that's the answer to that one, is getting the stuff out of that one person's head and into multiple.
I think that was a key point when you mentioned, when you mentioned earlier about the asking questions, and then you sense a bit of threat going on there. But how to manage that. Yeah,
being curious is difficult. None of this is easy, to be fair, but being curious is difficult, very difficult. But if you practice, then you can do it much more easily, and you can become more comfortable with it.
Good, thank you.
You're welcome. Any more?
Go with the one I had then, Valerie, if that's all right.
Sure.
So I think clearly curiosity is pivotal to this, and you mentioned about making sure that you're creating a culture of curiosity to make sure people can be curious. What advice or techniques have you got that you use to create that culture?
Some of this I'll talk about in the connect phase, because I think a lot of it is around your leadership style and showing vulnerability and showing that you don't have the answers, which I will talk about in just a minute. But again, as I said to Bobby, it's about practice. And Agile's about practice, right? You can't learn Agile from going on a course. You have to be doing it and trying different things and getting different contexts. So you're going to come across lots and lots of different types of people and different types of Brunos. So it's trying to understand what's going on with different people and having that self-awareness. There's so much to be said for that. But the question was around, sorry, remind me of the question. I'm going to go off on one. I
just wanted to find out if you had any particular kind of techniques that you used, or principles you use to make sure people do feel safe to be curious. I did put on that as like psychological safety. That's the thing that springs to mind, like creating that psychological safety in teams.
There is. So I'm a huge fan of Amy Edmondson's work, and that one video, that TED talk that she does about creating psychologically safe spaces. I think that the power of vulnerability is incredible. If you can show someone that you're vulnerable, then they can feel like they can be vulnerable, and I think that's a huge part of it, for me anyway. I've certainly been vulnerable on this journey. I shared a very, very, very early version of this with a room full of people in Edinburgh. And loads of people came over to me after and went, "Oh, Valerie, you're so brave." And I'm like, "Oh, I need your help to help me make this into something that's good." So the power of vulnerability is really good, but that's hard as well. So you have to work with yourself and your self-awareness to be comfortable with being vulnerable too.
Well, thanks,
Does that help?
Yeah, perfect.
Yeah. I shall move on. So we're in the connect phase. As I said, this is my favorite. I'm really passionate about psychological safety, equal voice. So it won't surprise you to see that within the tools, I call out psychological safety. So how can you make people feel comfortable, not just with you, but with a group? And there's so many great things out there that can help you to create psychologically safe spaces. Speaking of, one of my favorite ones is a superordinate goal. Every time I do this talk, I ask people who's heard of a superordinate goal, and sometimes I get no people in the room that have heard of a superordinate goal. But I got this from Amy Edmondson in her book Teaming. Superordinate means more important than anything else. So if you can find something for your team that is more important than anyone's agenda, and it's more important than anyone's plan that they might have, then you can open up a space that allows people to be vulnerable. It allows people to ask stupid questions. It allows people to make what they might term stupid ideas and throw crazy things into the mix, because nothing can be more important than the thing that you're there to do, if that makes sense. So when the Chilean miners were stuck, it was, the superordinate goal was save the miners, you know, so anything you can think of that might help us to save the miners. The leaders are showing vulnerability because they're showing they don't know the answer. People are able to go, I'm sorry, but, and ask a stupid question. And people are also able to say, how about we did this? Because there's nothing more important than saving the miners. And when I've talked to people about this and told them about that word and what that means and what it can do, a lot of people have reflected back to me that they think they had that during COVID. So a lot of us were thrown into chaos, and suddenly something became so important, and so many teams speak fondly of how well they work together with others during COVID, like the early days of COVID. So yeah, really love that thing, really love that tool. Continuous improvement tools. I don't need to tell an Agile meetup about continuous improvement tools. We should all know a lot of those really well, but how can we not only make sure that we're continually improving what we're doing, but also how we're doing it? We need to remember both of those things. Equal voice tools, another thing I'm really passionate about. How do we make the loud voices quieter and the quiet voices louder? My favorite toolkit for this is Liberating Structures, and that's a toolkit for basically meeting facilitation. And I was doing a workshop on liberating structures yesterday. It's another one of my favorite things, but it's a toolkit that's full of tools that will help you equalize the voices in a group. And then design thinking tools. So I've had the pleasure of working with some amazing service designers, and they have shown me some amazing tools to help us think more holistically and connect the dots. And that can also help us to turn problems into opportunities. And as soon as you're able to do that, again, you're creating psychological safety. When we pull people together and ask them to talk about a problem, you might find that you often hear people blaming others for the problem. If you ask them to talk about an opportunity, it completely changes the conversation into something that's a lot more positive. And that can be a really powerful thing to do as well. Questions to ask yourself during the connect phase. So this is really about you as a leader. Have I shown vulnerability and trust? Have I framed the problem as an opportunity? Have I created a space where agendas can be left at the door, and are all voices being heard? It's a lot about awareness, self-awareness, but also awareness of all the people around you and making sure that they are okay as well. Yeah, awareness, awareness, awareness. Okay, so Henry, we're back to Henry. He had a tough start in this connect phase. He knew that his team knew that he didn't trust them. He was micromanaging them. And he reminded himself that he needed to treat himself and Bruno with kindness, and he needed to unlearn some of the things that he was doing. But he used some of the connection and equal voice tools, and the team started to come up with some things. And they made a superordinate goal. So for this group, I forget who it was that works at Jaguar Land Rover, but you can tell me what you think of this. Allow our vehicles of the future to be fit for these unprecedented times. That was their superordinate goal. And they started to work well together. Once they started to have something in common and started to trust each other, they started to regularly discuss the problems and the results and improve the way that they were working together. It was agility in action, if you like. They had short, fast experiments. They were learning loads. They had loads of failures, but in the main, they let their frustration settle and they moved on. And they were really making progress. The problem that they had was that the thing they were making progress with wasn't just a new car. They were realizing that they needed to create and change the whole system around burns and the way that it worked. Now, Lisa Adkins, love her. She said this in a conference I was at this year. The only thing agility is guaranteed to deliver 100% of the time is impediments. If you are not coming up against blockers, you're not doing Agile right. I love this because, I mean, it just, you know, the frustration always comes from impediments, doesn't it? But actually that's how you know you're doing it right. So this was no exception. The software delivery was too slow, the policies were unsuitable, the budget structures were in the way, they don't have the expertise that they need. And of course, it's not just the car anymore, it's now something else. It's now something much bigger. So Bruno's back because Henry is used to working within the blockers that his company put in the way. He's not used to trying to change the blockers that the company put in the way. So this is scary stuff for him. This is completely new territory for almost anyone in that whole company. But he knows now that it could derail if he doesn't do something about this. And then I'm reminded of Jonathan Smart, impediments are not in the path, impediments are the path. So we can't actually achieve greater agility and greater results and greater outcome if we don't tackle those impediments. So Henry's feeling a bit forlorn. Mel says to him, you've unlearned a lot, you need to give yourself time to relearn. Because as we learn new things, we can have new perspectives for old problems. And what he's going to have to do now is learn how to reach out to other parts of the organization and reach out to his managers and ask them to change too. They'll have Bruno's too, but they might not have had the benefit of the journey that Henry's been on. They might not have the awareness, they might not be comfortable with curiosity, they might not have done the unlearning. So he needs to remember to treat all of them with kindness, and he needs to remember that he can do this. He has the power, because that's what it takes to close the loop, to break through those impediments and have real success. Now, this is the bit of the loop that I might change, because I get a lot of people coming over to me and saying, Valerie, you can't close an infinity loop. It's an infinity loop. And I'm like, okay, I understand. But for me, this part of the loop is about breaking through your impediments. It's if you don't take action, you can't get back around because you haven't changed anything. Nothing's different to consider again. So that's why I called it close. But I'm open to suggestions if you have any about what I might call it instead. I'm sitting on change at the moment, but I don't know. So yeah, let me know what you think. So this part of the loop, whatever we decide to call it, is very important. And the kind of tools that we can use here are impact assessments. They might give us a little bit of a comfort into what might happen. An imagination retreat. Now, I learned this from a guy at Service Design in Government this year, and he was talking about taking people out of their environment, and he was literally talking about a retreat. He was taking people out of inner city London, a community, deprived community, and he took them away to a place in the countryside and took them to a completely different environment and got them to imagine. And by taking people out of their normal environment, we can remove some of the boundaries that we put on ourselves when we're stuck in the same four walls all of the time. And they were able to really imagine what they could do to make their community a better place to live. So I love that. I've not tried it, but I'd love to try it. In this phase, you could use the loop. You could introduce that to other people. You could help them to get through to get through the same things that you've been through. Or you could use a kata, or you could use change mapping, another map, but a good one that will help us at this phase. And questions to ask yourself here. So where are the blockers and where should I now be spending my time? Because it's probably not with my team. It's probably conversations with other people that I need to be having now in order to make some sort of change that's going to mean that I can consider a different situation to what I considered before. And also ask yourself here, is the problem being solved still the right one? Because we can often move into we can get stuck on an output and forget about the bigger reason of what we're doing. So is it still the right one that we're trying to solve? So Henry is climbing up the loop, trying to get back to consider. And he needs to help other teams now to unlearn. And this is not even about removing things. It's not about changing or removing policies completely. It's sometimes just little tweaks or little evolutions to a relationship or to a policy. It's not necessarily smashing through some massive organizational impediment. It's doing just enough that you can consider a different situation and a different system that's now around you. And you can consider what's different now from before, because maybe you've managed to change something that means you've got more predictability and more repeatability. Maybe you can take a more informed approach. Maybe you've realized that you're solving the wrong problem. But wherever this takes you, that's okay. So we're almost at the end of Henry's story. They managed to deliver a success. They not only made a car, but they made the beginnings of a system that could completely change the way that Burns works in the future. And they worked together with management to remove the impediments. But not only that, they worked together with the rest of the organization. They brought in other teams too, and they kept removing each other's impediments. And slowly they started to make the organization a better place and started to build out this system. And it's not perfect, but they are creating a culture of empathy, curiosity, and connection at Burns. That's the end of Henry's story. I'm almost finished too, and then we can have a bit of a chat if you like. That's the loop. It's multi-level, it's meta, but I think it's what we need in these complex times. It helps with big problems, it helps with small problems, and we don't need to start at consider, we can start anywhere on the loop. And it's meant as a guide, it's meant to help. I've enjoyed creating it. I've had some great conversations and great insights, and it's helped me find patterns. It's helped me challenge my experiences and make what I'm doing and how I'm trying to help people even better. But this will probably never be complete. It's stayed like this for a few months now, but as I said, I keep getting feedback and I'm considering the changes that I might need to make. And when I use it in my work, sometimes I use it when I'm making workshops, when I'm thinking about a sticky situation, I use it at work, I use it at home. It's kind of ingrained in my brain now, so I use it all the time. But it's helped me take stock and check in and notice what's going on around me. But it also helps me in my job as a coach in helping people understand where they are now and where they might need to go next. But what I've realized is we live in unprecedented times, and that's not going to slow down. And it can take years to get rid of controlling bureaucracy. We're never done improving, but we are still human. So I invite you, and we might have time to do that. Figure out what your Bruno's like and treat it with acceptance, kindness, because it's nobody's fault. It's simply just not that simple anymore. And that's all I really have to say. All of the people on this slide, and there's probably more that I've not added, have helped me in this journey so far. The link to the loop on the website is there. And I can just thank you for listening and giving me your time this evening.
Amazing. Thank you
So
very much.
doing these
Thank you
things
very much,
online.
Valerie. I can see some claps. I know it's really difficult to people to show their appreciation on these virtual calls, but there's a lot of clap symbols coming up. I can see people actually clapping. I see Jane clapping on my screen. I'm sure there's a few more as well.
Oh, nice. I
That was
can't see
amazing.
that. Thank you.
Great stuff. Yeah, fantastic. Thanks so much, Valerie. I'm personally really looking forward to trying some of these techniques out. And trying some of those new tools that you mentioned as well. I'm quite familiar with some of them, most of them actually. There's a few. There's no questions in the chat that I can see. Are there any questions anyone wants to put to Valerie?
We have a hand up.
Ah, Bobby.
Oh, you're muted, Bobby.
I was double muted, sorry. Yeah, when you mentioned about the naming part of close, that kind of threw me as well, because I got in my head with that loop that the ultimate objective for going through that loop was to sort of deliver some actions to get the output, as it were. So I think that's where you're right. Is close the right word? And for me, it's like, yeah, you've relearned and you're pushing a fresh action or some kind of refurbished approach, as it were. Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely something that's not quite right about it. So yeah, thanks for your reflections on that, because I get that a lot.
Yeah, probably because I've just been in delivery mode for too long. That's probably what it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
What about restart? Are you going back around the loop again?
Restart. Yeah. Where are we? Where is it? There it is. I don't know. I was trying to work out what the message is for that part, and for me, it's about making some sort of change, and pushing through an impediment of some kind. So yeah,
It's
thoughts
done.
on a postcard. Are there any other questions? Go back to this. Yeah. Any more? Because there's one thing I can do before we finish up, which might be quite useful for you if there aren't any other questions.
What's your favourite liberating structure, Valerie? Your go-to one. No, they're all different for different techniques, but
right. So my number one favorite thing of liberating structures is in the very, very simple 1, 2, 4 all. And my favorite thing is the one part of 1, 2, 4 all. And if you don't know what 1, 2, 4 all is, the one part is individual reflection for a short amount of time before you go into a discussion in pairs and then a discussion in fours, and then you bring your insights to the room. And my favorite thing is the one part, because we never, as human beings, we want to be busy all the time, and we never give ourselves permission to stop and think. So I give people, as much as I possibly can, permission to stop and think before they then go and do something. Because I think when people have given me that time, like 90 seconds to myself to think about something, I often see people take their phones out when I do that. And I'm like, okay, maybe you want to check your whatever social media you want to check. But when people are really focused on something and they're given 90 seconds, the stuff they can get out of their brain is incredible. So that's my favorite thing. Last night, the best one was Troika Consulting. Mainly because it just allows you to get people are able to be heard. And that's what my co-facilitator that did that with me last night, she loves it because it makes her feel heard. And the structure is around 3 people. One person is a client, 2 people are consultants. And it can be any 3 people, it can be your team or it can be anyone. And the client has 1 minute to tell the consultants their issue, their problem, the thing that they're having a problem with. And they are only allowed to speak for a minute, and the consultants aren't allowed to say anything for that minute. So it is that person's time. Then they have 2 minutes of conversation where the consultants ask clarifying questions. And I always say clarifying questions is not advice. It's trying to understand the problem a bit more. And then there are 5 minutes where the client turns around, or if you're online, they turn off their outgoing camera and their incoming camera so nobody can see the other side. And they just listen for 5 minutes while the two consultants discuss the problem that the person is having. And then after those 5 minutes, the client turns around and has a conversation about what they've heard and what was useful about it. And yesterday we always get people to reflect on how did you find the structure. And this one woman just went, before we'd even asked her to reflect, she went, "Oh my goodness, that was amazing." And I was like, "Oh, wow." But she couldn't believe how something so simple that sounds really weird. So if you're listening to me now going, "That sounds weird, I'm not sure I want to try that," it is weird, but it's so effective because literally 3 people can help each other so much by using that structure. It's awesome. Awesome. I could talk about liberating structures all day, so don't make me do that. But hopefully I answered your question.
Yeah, thanks. I like liberating structures too. I've just put a link by the way in the chat, so if anyone's interested, it's probably in your material as well, Valerie, but I thought I'd just post it.
Yeah, it should be, yeah.
It's so good.
So
Cool. Do you want to do your final wrap-up?
Yeah, let me do
activity
that.
then, Valerie?
So there's kind of 2 things in the talk. The one is the loop, but the other that's just so important to me is, in fact, Bruno. And when I do this with organizations and I go in, I ask them for like 2 slots, one for the talk and one for an activity afterwards. And what I ask people to do is draw their Bruno the same way as I've drawn mine. And in fact, oh, he's gone. I always keep Bruno on a post-it note on the back of my laptop, but he must have gone. And then what I ask them to do is talk to each other about their Brunos and think about how it feels on the inside, how it presents to others on the outside, and what your Bruno needs to help you get back into that sort of calm mental state. We're not going to do all of that today, but I'm going to just talk to you a little bit about my Bruno so that you understand a little bit about that. And the video that I have on the slide for this is about the hand-brain model. It's really worth watching that video so that you understand this. But this can be a really awesome thing to do with your team. And I'll tell you why. So my Bruno is this little green guy. And that represents me backed into a corner, feeling about this big. And when I flip my lid, I feel like I have nowhere to go. But how that comes out on the outside is that I chuck lightning bolts at people. So I get really quite snappy. And I start just not being me. And all I need is somebody to come and take me out of the corner and make me feel like me again. But that's not what people do with me when they see me being snappy. What I get is, "Oh my goodness, Valerie, why are you being so snappy?" You know, that's how people treat me when I'm in this flip lid state. So if we're able to talk to each other about how we feel when we're in a flip lid state, we can actually recognize each other's Brunos when they've been triggered. And then we know how to speak to our colleagues and bring them out of that state. And it can transform team relationships, just doing a very simple 10-minute exercise of each drawing your Bruno. Maybe watch the video by Dr. Dan Siegel so that you understand what he's talking about. And it's always useful for you to be comfortable to share yours first when you're asking other people to share. And it's always really important to give people a free pass, because it's not the first time I've been in a room where I know that simply by asking somebody to draw their Bruno, I've caused them to feel that way. So it's really important to encourage people to be comfortable with it, but give them kindness if it's just too much. So yeah, that's my Bruno there. The other one is Henry's, but that's based on my husband's Bruno. And the first time I asked him to draw his Bruno, he looked at me like I was like, what are you talking about? But now we understand when each other's feeling that way, and we know what to do, and we can help each other through it rather than get annoyed at each other. So it's not just good in your professional life, it's also a really useful thing to do in your personal life too, because it happens to us all. We all get triggered, and there's nothing we can do about that. So it's better that we understand and help each other. So that's my message. And if you want to draw your Bruno now, feel free to. But I understand it's almost 8 o'clock, so you might just want to go and have some dinner.
At work, we actually have user manuals where people kind of list out, how they like to work. And I guess this is like that. This could be included as part of that. I guess we call them user manuals. Other people probably call them different things, but this is form, I guess, part of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, here's my Bruno and here's what it needs type thing. If you see me act like this, don't treat me like this, treat me like that. That might be quite a nice addition to what you've already got, Tom. Yeah.
Amazing. Can't see any hands, and I've nothing in the chat. Does anyone else have anything before we close up?
I think the only point that you've mentioned there is what has become tricky is this hybrid working. So, years ago, the office would be full. At one point, I would know when the guy opposite me was about to flip his lid, because you could see it bubbling. But when you're working at home, or there's so many other people working at home, that's the difficult part today, I think.
Yeah. You often don't notice it until it's already happened.
After an event is even more tricky, yeah.
Vehicle is at the garage camera.
Oh.
And also, people don't get to like leave work at home anymore and go to the office and sort of separate themselves. Most everyone's dealing with both things all day.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's when I realized that actually I was bringing a lot of it home, and I was taking Bruno home, and now my husband understands that, but he didn't always understand that. It's tough. Being remote is tough. There's a really great talk by Kerry Newton-Sargonar, who actually Lean Agile Glasgow are doing it in a few weeks remotely, if you wanted to jump into that on I think it's the 13th of December. I think I can give you the link for that too, but she talks a lot about hybrid working, and she talks about Bruno's as well, and how that affects us. She's a neuroscientist in training, so she's a really good one. Tom, I can give you her details so you can get her along here sometime too.
Oh yeah, please do. That'd be amazing.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. Okay. Any more? No more. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn, you'll find me. It's just Valerie McLean. I'm there. I'll make sure that Tom's got the slides, and that you've all got a link to the website so that you can come back to any of this whenever you want to. But I'm always here for feedback, and I'm always here for questions. So just connect with me on LinkedIn, and I'll have a chat.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Valerie. Thank you for giving up your evening as well, because I know you've been really busy doing other talks as well and with work. So massive thanks.
I'm amazed the kids
for your
doesn't
time.
come in to say hello to you all as well, but they actually used to stay out tonight, which is kind of amazing.
I haven't seen any. I haven't seen it at all. Cool.
Thank you so much for having me, everybody.
Yeah.
Hi there, Jeff Watts here, and like me, I'm sure you loved that session because it's another example of becoming great at Agile. We're proud to sponsor Agile Northants here at Agile Mastery Institute because, like us, the people of Agile Northants know that mastery matters. And we're on a mission to make Agile certification meaningful. We want to change the paradigm so that when people think of Agile certification, they think of a pathway of actual, real, deep learning over time. Not just learning good practice, but reflecting on that practice and tailoring the learning to the context of the learner. So at Agile Mastery Institute, we don't just offer 2-day classes. We offer at least 6 months worth of support, a combination of classroom, of coaching sessions, and community support. So you know that you will get some great practice content and theory and skills development, but also you will be able to direct that learning through your bespoke coaching sessions over the course of at least 6 months. This will help you in your role, it'll help your employers, it'll help your teams, and it'll help regain respect for Agile certification throughout the industry. So if you believe Agile certification matters, then come along to one of our cohorts. We've got licensed guides around the world offering flexible programs over time zones and cadence. Check out agilemasteryinstitute.com for your options. If you've got any questions about any of it, how the pathways work, how it could work for you, how it could work for your organization, then just drop me a note and I'll happily explain more. But until then, keep on doing great Agile.